Interest rates are rising right now, and being in debt is becoming more expensive all the time. In this episode of Wealth Talks, episode 460, we're going to talk about how to become debt-free.
Becoming debt-free can be a daunting task. Many people will never know what it feels like to be debt-free.
People take on debt voluntarily or involuntarily. Voluntary debt is like student loans and credit card debt, and involuntary debt is like when emergencies happen. But to be debt free, you can't have any debt. None, zero, zilch.
This reminds me of a story. One of the kids' favorite stories is Frog and Toad. There were several stories in this book, but the one called Cookies was their favorite. And Toad makes some cookies. And they're delicious cookies because he samples them. And so he runs over to Frog's house and he says, try my cookies. So they're just eating cookies, commenting on how good they are. And then they start saying, we really should stop eating these cookies. Oh, yes, we'll have one last cookie. And then they continue talking about how they need to stop eating them as they're eating them. And so they come up with a solution. They will put them in a box. So they put all the cookies in a box, put the lid on, and then they suddenly realize they can open the box, which they do when they eat cookies. And then one of them says, well, I know, we'll put a string around the box. So they put a string around the box, but then they realize they can open the string, open the box, and start eating cookies. So then they suggest a ladder on a high shelf. But they realize, too, they can get the ladder, get the cookies, untie the string, open the box, eat the cookies. So finally, one of them says, we need willpower. Well, what's willpower? They take out the cookies outside and they throw them up in the air and call for the birds. And the birds come and they take all the cookies. And he says, see, now we have lots and lots of willpower. And Toad looks at Frog and he said, Frog, you can keep all the willpower. I'm going to go home and make a cake.
That's like the story of getting out of debt for so many people.
It is.
And as you were going through that story, it just reminded me of the people that actually froze their credit cards in chunks of ice.
Yes.
It didn't keep them from getting to the credit cards. It just made it more difficult for them. And if that's what they need, okay, that's what they need. But at a certain point, you don't have to go through all of those steps just to make it harder for yourself if you decide on getting out of debt and make a plan for it.
Making a plan for getting out of debt is the primary way to be able to live debt-free. And what we need to do is sit down and really have some self-introspect and find out, where am I spending money? Mm-hmm. That's the beginning. We have to have a plan. We have to find out where we're at to know where we're going. Michelle, you wrote the last chapter in Prescription for Wealth about that, going into a mall and you're trying to get to a store and it's a new mall, you've never been to it, so you go over to the kiosk and it says, you are here. You got to find out where you are in your debt before you have any idea or any way of making a plan to get out of it.
And you want to have a realistic picture too, because so many people, their expectation of what being debt-free looks like doesn't necessarily take into account that we always pay our utilities after we've used the electricity or the service for the month. We always pay our taxes
in arrears.
Property taxes, if you don't pay your property taxes and you have no debt on the property, they can still come and take the property away from you if you don't pay them. We're always going to have that type of debt still around. And so living debt-free is a little bit of a golden ideal that most people will never fully reach if we're going to define debt-free as owing nobody anything.
We also have to have a mindset change. So with Frog and Toad, they had these cookies, and so they thought they just had to consume them. Where if they could have exercised some self-control, not just giving it all to the birds, but to say, oh no, we're putting the lid on the box because we're going to stop eating the cookies right now. We're going to save some for after dinner. And then they're putting some parameters on their cookie eating, which someone in debt can start recognizing, oh, I need to put some parameters on my spending so that I can reallocate some of this money I'm spending to pay off that debt.
A radio talk show host might tell you to give up your coffee or to cut out eating out. But it doesn't mean that you can't have a coffee out or that you can't go out to eat. You maybe just not as often. Maybe you do need to cut back in those areas.
So
That's
keep your
part of
cookies.
looking at your budget, see where your money is going. Keep your cookies, just specify when you're going to eat them. Plan your luxuries out, how you're going to enjoy those.
We've helped lots of people get out of debt and then move on to being free from debt, living a life free from debt. And yet people have to come to the reality that it's not the debt that is the dirty four-letter word that's killing them. It's their habits. It's their spending. It's their lack of work ethic. Many people that really want to live debt-free, they realize that, oh, I need to produce more because, yes, I'm in debt because I'm spending, I'm using credit to take care of necessities in my life. And if that's happening, that means you maybe need to get another job. I mean, many people that we've helped, they'll take a different job.
Some sort of moonlighting.
Right. Because if we don't do that, then we're going to be enslaved to this debt the rest of our life.
Well, I remember reading a story too, not just a story, but a book that I was reading. And it was talking about, the author was talking about his girlfriend being in debt. She had some student loans that were really kind of oppressing her. And her idea was, I think I need to take one evening a week and go to a yoga class and, maybe do some meditation to kind of help her manage the stress of having this debt. And he said, no, don't do that. You don't need to manage how you feel about the debt. Instead, take that one night a week, go get a job at a restaurant, earn money, and pay off your debt. That way you're still taking just one night a week, but you're actually doing something about the debt rather than just trying to put a Band-Aid on a wound. You're actually addressing
feel
what
good
needs to
about
be
it.
done. Yeah. So,
So there are a couple
oftentimes it's our
approaches.
mindset.
A couple of approaches we can take. We can look at trying to reduce expenses, limit those, plan out when we're going to enjoy our luxuries, when we're going to go out to eat, when we're going to enjoy
I
our
like
coffee out.
I like you saying that. Planning your luxury.
That's one thing that we can do. Or we can also look at increasing income. And of course, the fastest way to pay off existing debt is to do both of those at the same time.
We always start with people taking the 10-20-70 principle and finding out what are the necessities in their life that they can't live without. And maybe that is your Starbucks every morning. Great, put it on there. But realize that there's something else on the list that you're spending that you're probably going to have to cut out or reduce if you want to continue to have your Starbucks every morning.
So, and
Sure.
you mentioned the 10-20-70 principle. So that is taking your income, 10% is yours to keep. 20%, no more than that, should go to pay off your creditors. And the creditors we are talking about are usually credit card. If you have a mortgage, that belongs in your 70% part of your living expenses. Because if you didn't have a mortgage, you'd have rent. And same thing with a car. If you don't have a car to get around, it's kind of hard to get to your job. So that falls into, a car payment would fall into the 70%.
But you don't need a Lamborghini to get around.
Exactly. So, you have to do some balancing here.
And you don't need to have a mansion to live someplace.
I talked to a lady just recently who was wanting to get out of debt and save for retirement. And she didn't have a ton of debt. She had like $10,000 on a credit card and didn't consider that a lot because it could be paid off in a few months if she really worked at it. But she knew the problem. She knew she should have more saved, but she didn't. She said, the problem is I just spend too much. I'm not disciplined in that way. And so looking at if she's saving for retirement, if she puts it into a retirement account again, what's to prevent her from going and getting that if she's not disciplined? In fact, she has in the past. It comes out in the conversation. She had taken a withdrawal out of 401k, taken a penalty on it to pay off debt in the past. So what keeps that from happening again? Nothing. It would be better off if she could develop the discipline, keeping the savings in a place where she could access it if she needed to, but chooses not to. And the reality is that until somebody is upset enough with the situation that they're in to want something different, it's going to be hard for them to get out of the place that's keeping them in debt. the thinking, the emotions, and the lifestyle that's keeping them where they are now.
Yeah, that makes me think of the story of Jesus when he was healing people. One time he asked, "Do you want to get well?" Because a lot of people don't really want to exercise the discipline to live debt free. They just don't want the burden of having to pay bills that for stuff they've already got.
Mm.
And they don't see the value there. They just want to be free from that debt. They don't want to really experience freedom.
You have to want that freedom before you can be free from the debt itself.
Yeah.
So what's the process that somebody goes through? Obviously, they can sit down, look at their budget, look at the list of the debts that they have, list out the amounts. We can go through some of that process. Let's go ahead and do that now. In fact, if somebody has a $20,000 credit card debt and a required payment of $284 a month, that's a 17% interest rate, then that's a debt that they could pay down. But what if they also have a $5,000 credit card that's charging $140 a month that's only at 10%? Well, the $140 payment is almost half of what the payment is on the $20,000 debt, but you only have to pay $5,000 to get rid of that payment. So even though it's at a lower interest rate, because of the lower balance and the higher cash flow, it makes sense to go after that debt first and get it paid off. And that's another way that people should look at the process is when they're paying off debt. A lot of people just tend to send an extra payment to this card, an extra payment to this card as they have room in their budget. But then it might go a couple months then as the balance builds back up. And it's really hard to tell if you're making progress.
I hear that all the time from people. They say, well, I put a little extra here and a little extra there, and they don't really have a plan. They're just putting a little extra here and there. And so they're not seeing the effects of what that extra is doing for them.
Yeah.
They're not realizing it. But when you look at someone's debt, you actually go about it strategically so that they can very quickly see the results of those payments because they're not just doing them willy-nilly here and there.
You get the first one paid off, and then that helps with the next one, and so on.
That's powerful.
And you're doing it consistently because you've taken the 10, 20, 70, you looked at your cash flow, and you've determined what you can consistently put toward this goal of paying down your debt. So that way you make progress steadily toward your goal. So that's a part of the process. Another way we can look at that process is we can help you through this. You don't have to do it all on your own. So call us and schedule an appointment, and then we'll help you get that plan developed so that you can make progress on a consistent basis, and that way you'll be able to grow your wealth over time.
Now, Michelle, you were talking about the 10, 20, 70 principle, and you said the 10% is to keep. And a lot of people don't see any reason to keep money. But the money that you keep becomes the seeds to grow wealth so that you can live free from debt. And if we don't have that seed money, then we never will experience the freedom, even if we get out of debt.
That's true, because so many people are working and working and working to get out of debt. But the reality is that if they're not building anything else in the meantime, they're just working back to zero. It's a harsh reality, but it is reality.
When we get back from the break, we're going to talk about how to live debt-free, which is different than being debt-free. When you live debt-free, you plan your life so that you can live free from debt. But first, this.
If you make the minimum payment on your credit card, it's going to take you 40 years to pay it off. If you have a $20,000 card at 19.99% interest with a minimum payment of $333.29 per month. Yes, the cents make a difference because if you pay just $333, you'll never pay it off. If you pay $334, you'll pay it off almost 10 years early. Just 30 years and 3 months, and you'll save $38,000. But you're still paying over $100,000 of interest. If you pay an extra $110 a month, bump that payment up to $444 a month, you'll pay the credit card off in just 7 years, and you'll save over $120,000. You need to get out of credit card debt. If you have credit card debt at a high interest rate, paying it off may be the best investment you can make.
The mistakes people make when paying off debt is not planning ahead. As a doctor, I saw people go on diets all the time to lose weight for a wedding or a special event, and you see them 6 months later after that special event, and they're heavier than they were when they started. They didn't plan ahead for a lifestyle change.
Sometimes that happens with people getting out of debt. They plan ahead to get out of debt, but then they haven't planned for a lifestyle change, and so they gain it back again by adding more debt.
They go out and get a cake instead of just throwing the cookies away.
Maybe
you
they
know.
even achieved their goal of becoming debt free, but they didn't stay that way. They didn't continue to live debt free. And so, what does living debt free? How can we differentiate that from just getting out of debt?
Being debt free doesn't give you anything. You can be dirt poor and be debt free, but it doesn't give you a sense of accomplishment or reward because what do you have to show for it?
Nothing.
You have nothing because debt free is nothing. But living free from debt means you're not enslaved to the lender. The scripture tells us the borrower is slave to the lender. So how do we set it up so that we're not enslaved to the lender? Because in our society, unless you're homeless, it's impossible to live completely out of debt.
That's right, because we will use the electricity during the month, and then we get a bill for it because we've already used it.
Mm-hmm.
And so living debt-free, that doesn't really work.
You pay your property taxes in arrears. If you don't pay them, they come take your house.
There was a point that you were debt free, though. You didn't have any debts that you owed on the books to anybody. And yet, was that freedom for you?
Well, I was 37. We had just written a check and paid cash for our house. We had no house payments. We had no cell phone at the time. We really had no debt at all. And yet, we weren't living free because there still has to be food put on the table. There still has to be clothes that have to be paid. There still has to be the property taxes that are paid for. And I found myself taking a night job, working at night to make sure that everyone in the family had enough to eat.
Yeah, and that wasn't freedom.
That's not freedom.
And you were starting a practice, and so many times you've said you wish you could have reached into the walls and pull out some of the money that you had used to pay off that house. And it wasn't available to you so that you could advertise and let people know, hey, I'm in business here. Come see me in my practice. You couldn't do that. And we didn't have a cash cushion, any money backing us up to help us through that time. And so that was very difficult. Yeah, people would have said, yeah, you're living debt free, but we weren't living, it wasn't a good feeling because we
free
felt
from debt?
No, we felt pressured, and we still had these taxes that would be due, and we could lose the whole house if we didn't pay our taxes. All those things. So just because we're alive, there are pressures. You need to eat. You get hungry. You get thirsty. You get tired. You have to manage your money, and there's good debt and bad debt, and you have to learn how to manage it to create the lifestyle.
I just want to stop right here, though, for a moment and say there's nothing wrong with taking a night job.
Oh,
if you've got to do it to get control of your life so that you can live free from debt, then that's what you should be doing.
Sure.
If that's the job that you have, great. So I'm not denigrating taking a night job. I'm saying that I was forced to take a night job because I didn't have any debt, but guess what? Life goes on and you have to do something.
So that was kind of a different kind of a debt or difficulty in your life because that's not what you chose to do. You wanted to be home to put your children to bed at night. So that was a different kind of grievance in our life at that time. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with a night job. But sometimes we want a little different value in our life than where we're currently at. And when we're dissatisfied with that, then we can choose to make other decisions to get us in a different path.
So if you would have had a mortgage on your home in that situation, then yes, you would not have been technically debt free, but you would have been able to live without the pressures of debt
Because
that came to apply whether you had the debt or not.
It's a way
On
of
the
thinking, like Michelle said. It's if we would have had the money in a liquid account where we could have had it and had a mortgage, we still could have been living debt free because we had the ability to pay the mortgage off if we had to. And that's the difference. And you mentioned a cash cushion. That's why a cash cushion is so important. We live in a society that thrives on debt. If all debt was paid off today, there wouldn't be any money in our universe, because money is a component of debt. And so understanding that, we have to learn how to manage debt instead of it managing us. And when we do that, debt can go from a dirty 4-letter word to a 4-letter word that helps us produce more and become more content and happier in life.
Living free from debt doesn't mean that you don't have debt. You can have some good debt as long as it's helping you to live free from that debt.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when we were first married and we had to rip out the floor in the bathroom, Michelle, because you were getting sick because the floor had got sewage seepage in it and formaldehyde was coming out of the subfloor. We had to go in debt to do that. And thank God that we could, because then we could live free, you could be healthy, and it kept you from having to go to the hospital where we would have acquired even more debt.
Mm-hmm.
So debt is a good thing if we manage it and use it properly. It's when we let it get out of control and it controls us.
So that's what we're talking about today, is we want to get out of that bad debt so that we can better manage our lives and be more productive, have assets that produce value for us, give us guaranteed value so that our money is working better, and so that we can take advantage of opportunities that come along in life.
Well, if we're going to make living debt-free a lifestyle, then we need to know how to build that lifestyle. And that's where we find the 10-20-70 principle so helpful to people, is because it prescribes a model that we can use in splitting up the income that we have, regardless of what that income is, whether it's a little bit of income or whether it's a lot of income. Sometimes the percentages change a little bit depending upon the situation, but having that model to work from can let you know if you're on track for a sustainable lifestyle. And it can help you set that lifestyle so even if you do have some debt, you know that it's not getting out of hand. So real quick, if we break down the 10-20-70 principle, 70% of the income that you make should be for living expenses. 10%, the 10 part of that, should be yours to keep. 20% is the maximum that should be going toward creditors at any given time. And that does not necessarily include a mortgage. A mortgage would typically be included in the 70% portion of your lifestyle, because if you didn't have a mortgage, you would be needing to rent somewhere. And so that's still going to be a cash flow that's part of your lifestyle, whether you're buying a house or whether you're not. That usually falls into the 70%.
And what's important to understand is the 10-20-70 is just the beginning. Because as time goes on and you manage debt better and better, you're not going to need 70% of your income to live on.
True.
Your house is going to get paid off. The car is going to get paid off. And then what do you do with that money? Do you just go out and bigger house? Do we become like the story that Jesus talks about in Matthew, where I'm going to tear down my barns and build bigger ones and kick back my feet and relax and enjoy what I've done?
We shouldn't.
Yeah, he was a fool. He said, your soul's going to be required of you tonight. Then he gets all of what you've hoarded up.
And neither, if we're being good stewards, should 20% of our income always be going toward debt. But if we don't have that 20% going toward debt, hey, we could even save 30% without working any harder.
Or that
Without changing our
20% can
lifestyle
become
portion.
money that we have access to make investments that are a little bit more risky, because we've got our cash cushion that we've been keeping at that 10%, and it's not going to devastate us if we lose that 20% at that point.
True. And then it can also be a helpful fail-safe. So let's say that somebody has set their lifestyle and everything's going along grandly, and then somebody in the family has a medical issue and they have to take on debt because medical bills can be expensive. So what do you do then? Did everything just go down the drain? Well, no, you want to negotiate those medical payments so they don't take up more than 20% of your income. And that way you get to stay on track toward your goals, even when an emergency comes up like that.
I like that because what you just talked about, because it's a mindset, realizing that debt is not a dirty 4-letter word. Sometimes you need it to manage life, a medical emergency that comes up. You've got to take care of that or you lose the life itself. And so when we have the mindset realizing, oh, I can control this, I can take care of it, and then we really can flourish in life, in our financial life.
When you do these things, you'll have the benefits of being debt-free and having money available to control.
Your financial future starts with what you do now.
Next week, our son Jesse, who's getting married this month, will join us right here at the Wealth Talks table. We're going to be talking about premarital financial planning, house hunting, wedding planning, amongst other things. You can listen to the entire conversation right here on Wealth Talks.